Hi folks! Welcome to my review of Game of Thrones Season 7, Episode 7, which is called The Wolf and the Dragon. The first thing you might notice today is that the light's a bit weird in this video. That's because my curtains are yellow and it's really, really bright, and if I film without the curtains drawn, then you will literally just see my ridiculously pale skin bleached out by the sun, so you're just gonna have to deal with the yellowness. Just get comfortable with it. So this was the season finale, and thus this will be the last review video that I make until season 8, which might not come out until as late as 2019. However, stay tuned to my channel for more Game of Thrones, A Song of Ice and Fire related material, because I have a lot of opinions and I love you all so much. I just think you deserve to hear them. Oh, and before I continue, I've uninstalled the callback alert for the last couple of episodes, including this one, and that's because there's just been so many in the last few episodes that it just would have been constantly callback alert, callback alert, callback alert, and frankly that's really annoying and I would have lost viewers, so I decided just to take an editorial decision to ditch it. Because this is the end of the season, I'm going to go into a little bit more detail about theories and predictions, so stay tuned for that. Anyway, we open with a shot of Grey Worm and the Unsullied standing in formation outside King's Landing. I mean, no need to explain how they got all the way there from Casterly Rock, where they've been since episode 3, that's fine. Next we see Jaime and Bronn standing on the battlements, getting all philosophical.
Maybe it really is all cocks in the end.
I mean, that's a pretty interesting heteronormative stance to take, considering the two monarchs currently fighting over the crown are queens and don't have, and nor have they ever, had cocks. So I'd say this idea is pretty incorrect and show the boys once again misunderstanding and underestimating the ladies, but you guys keep telling yourself how important your dicks are. That's fine. And then the Dothraki sweep in between the Unsullied's ranks, and we see the contrast between the hyper-disciplined Unsullied and the horde that is Daenerys' Khalasar. Next we see Tyrion, Jon and the allies all on the ship sailing up Blackwater Bay. Jon's comments of why would anyone want to live like this, about how 1 million people are crammed into the city of King's Landing, is such a hilariously typical northern attitude. If you replaced King's Landing with London, this could easily be a modern conversation. Then Sandor Clegane goes below decks to check if the White is still alive and kicking, or undead and kicking, and we find that it is. I kind of wish that it hadn't been, and that Cersei had been like, so you've brought me a dead body to show me. What the fuck, guys? Now, the Dragon Pit meeting was pretty awesome. We've never seen the Dragon Pit before in the show or the books, so we get a quick history recap from Ser Jorah.
Why did they build it?
Dragons don't understand the difference between what is theirs and what isn't. Land, livestock, children. Letting them roam free around the city was a problem.
As Dany said later on, keeping the dragons in captivity was the beginning of the end for the Targaryen dynasty. After the Targaryen civil war, the dragons became smaller and weaker in size. This was because during that civil war, which history remembers as the Dance of Dragons, all but 2 of the Targaryen family's 18 dragons were killed in the violence. Quick history recap for anyone who's interested. The Dance of Dragons was the Targaryen civil war, which started because of a dispute about the succession between Princess Rhaenyra and her younger half-brother, another Prince Aegon. It's a great story, so I definitely would recommend looking into it. During the war, the 4 dragons that remained chained up in the Dragon Pit were set upon by angry peasants who, as in all wars, had borne the brunt of the violence between the 2 Targaryen factions. The last dragon to survive in the Dragon Pit, after King's Landing's civilians had killed the other 3, broke free of its chains and flew upwards to try to escape, hit the dome and the ceiling, and brought the roof down on itself and the angry mob within the pit. Hence the structure that we see in this episode having no roof. Okay, back to the episode. Now let's talk for a moment about how amazing it is to see all of these characters all together. I'm sad that Sansa, Arya and Bran couldn't be there, but to be honest, that might have just been too much excitement to me and I would have exploded and not been here to share my thoughts with you today, so it's a good thing, right? First of all, we get a lovely reunion between Tyrion and Podrick, who haven't seen each other since Tyrion was imprisoned in the Black Cells in season 4. After that, we get a lot of shots of people side-eyeing each other, beginning with Brienne and the Hound, who in the end decide to let bygones be bygones and end up bonding over their mutual pride and love of Arya Stark.
The only one that needs protecting is the one that gets in her way.
It won't be me.
Then we get another hint about how Bronn is eventually going to defect to Team Dany.
Perhaps you've been reconsidering your allegiances. Remember my offer. Whatever they're paying you, I'll pay double.
I thought it would happen earlier in the season, but instead he stuck with Jamie up to this point. I do think it will solve a few problems for the writers when he eventually does, though. Did anyone else notice how Bronn took Podrick off for a beer so the fancy folk could talk? In the show, it did serve to add to the suspicion that something terrible was going to happen, like Cersei was about to blow everybody up. But I think that in reality, it was because Jerome Flynn and Lena Headey used to have a relationship, and it ended so badly that they've actually got it written into their Game of Thrones contracts that they never ever share a scene together and are kept apart on set. Dark times, eh? To add to the tension, we even get a few shots of Jon, Jorah, Brienne, etc., all taking note of their departure and looking around a little bit nervously. Maybe Cersei had indeed planned to off them all, but because she realises that Daenerys isn't with them, realises that there's just no point. The Feast of Side-Eye continues, first with Jaime v Brienne, then Cersei v Tyrion, then Euron v Theon, and then of course we get the Hound recognising Frankenmountain. How? And basically fucking confirming that Clegane Bowl will be happening in Season 8.
That's not how it ends for you, brother. You know who's coming for you. You've always known.
Get hype! And then, of course, Dany arrives on her dragon. Why would she come by ship when she can arrive on a fucking dragon? If I could travel to work by dragon every day, then I would. And then I'd never get bitched at for being late. All I could think of when Daenerys was dismounting from Drogon with all the eyes in the pit on her was that if that had been me, I just would have fallen flat on my face and embarrassed myself. The fact that all Cersei can say after Dany's glorious entrance is,
"We've been here for some time,"
in as insouciant and unimpressed manner as possible is just perfect. Then as the meeting begins, once again we see Euron not having a clue or possibly not giving a fuck about courtly protocol.
We are all facing a unique...
Theon!
I have your sister.
Then we do show and tell with the White. There are some lovely little character points here, like Qyburn picking up the severed hand and looking at it in wonder. Lena Headey does a great job of showing Cersei trying to maintain composure while low-key being utterly terrified. And for some reason, Jon doing his little demo of how to kill the Whites like the sexiest science teacher ever was pretty amusing. I felt like he and Davos had been practicing that for days on the ship on the way there. And now we can lay to rest the issue as to whether dragon glass kills just White Walkers or Whites instead, because this episode has made it canon that it does. At first, Euron bowing out so suddenly really disappointed me. I thought, oh, so is this the last we've seen of him then? That's rubbish. But then later on, we discover this has all been an elaborate ruse. And I was bloody overjoyed that we're going to see a lot more of my favourite psycho pirate in Season 8. And Jon...
I am true to my word. Or I try to be. That is why I cannot give you what you ask. I cannot serve two queens.
Show Jon becomes more and more incompetent with each passing episode. I mean, he is right that if everybody lies all the time, words stop meaning anything. But that is a slightly less pressing issue than the apocalypse. You know, the thing he's been obsessing over ever since Season 5. Maybe we could wait to consider the finer principles of honour and integrity after we're sure we're not all gonna die. Also, lol at Jon referencing his father when talking about the importance of being honourable, considering that it was definitely Ned's biggest lie that Jon was even his son in the first place. Jaime values Brienne's opinion so much. He admires her. He really wants to be the kind of person that she is. But because for 20 years he's been marked as the Kingslayer, and for even longer than that he's been in love with Cersei, he struggles to change. I believe Brienne telling him fuck loyalty has a huge influence on Jaime. If Brienne of fucking Tarth is saying that something is more important than honour and loyalty, it must be pretty serious. When Tyrion leaves to try and sort things out with Cersei, it's a little bit daft that he walks all the way from the Dragon Pit through the streets of King's Landing to the Red Keep without guards or without a peace banner, considering there's been a bounty on his head there for years, but fine. Tyrion and Cersei's scene together was fucking incredible. Lena Headey and Peter Dinklage, in my opinion, are the best actors in the show, possibly apart from Sophie Turner. And seeing them on screen together again after all these years was amazing, and they do not disappoint.
You killed our father.
After he sentenced me to death for a crime I didn't commit. Yes, I killed him. Hate me for it if you want. I hate myself for it, in spite of what he was, in spite of what he did to me.
Oh, poor little man. If Papa was mean to you, do you have any idea what you did when you fired that crossbow? You left us open. You laid us bare for the vultures, and the vultures came and tore us apart.
Cersei blaming Tyrion for Tommen's death was pretty ludicrous, but I guess that's Cersei for you. I wondered why she didn't kill Tyrion when she had the chance, but aside from the obvious answer, which is plot armor, I guess the main reason is that Dany is outside with her dragons, and if her hand doesn't come back, she knows what will become of her. Despite that, it was a bit of a tense moment when he tells her to give the command to the mountain to kill him. And what plan did they hatch in that room? I've seen a theory going round that he plotted to make Cersei's unborn child Daenerys' heir, since he thinks Dany can't have children and she refuses to discuss the succession with him. It would explain the very vexed look on Tyrion's face later on in the episode when he realises that Jon and Dany are at it. Dany getting knocked up would put a pretty huge spanner in the works of this plan. Not that it would have worked out anyway, because obviously Cersei was lying about allying her forces with theirs, but he doesn't know that at this point. Back at the dragon pit, having the ground littered with the bones of small dead dragons was a really nice touch. I wondered if Dany telling Jon a dragon is not a slave might come up later on, if when they discover his heritage and they fall out about it. Maybe now he's bent the knee, she'll order him to do something that he doesn't want to do, and a dragon is not a slave will be his retort. Once again we get twatted over the head with the whole Dany can't have children thing. This is obviously going to be an important point in the final season. Maybe Jon will get her knocked up and end up fathering a bastard, which is a major thing that he's always feared, because he won't be able to marry her because of the political ramifications. I was pretty shocked and disappointed when Cersei calls her banners, thinking, is that it? Really? Fortunately, that wasn't it, but more on that later. In Winterfell, I was very happy to see Sansa looking so fucking pissed off at the fact that Jon has once again made an impulsive decision without consulting his advisors and bent the knee to Dany. You can see on this scroll that he signed himself as Warden of the North. I would be so angry if I was her. Littlefinger telling Sansa that Jon can be unnamed as the monarch is hopefully foreshadowing that the Northern Lords will next season choose Sansa as their queen, because I will not let go of this dream, people. I will not. It seems odd that Littlefinger is suggesting to Sansa that Jon might want to marry Daenerys because the alliance between them would be powerful. Wouldn't that only make sense if he hadn't bent the knee? It seems like that would have been a sensible compromise, but now that Jon is officially her subordinate, it seems like it's not really necessary. At this point, a political marriage between Jon and Sansa makes a hell of a lot more sense, and I'm wondering after this conversation if that will occur to her when she discovers that he's her cousin and not her half-brother. The scene between Jon and Theon was great. Theon saying to Jon that he always seems to make the right step is quite funny. I mean, I guess Theon means that Jon always seems to take the honourable path, which is admirable, but show Jon is not a smart man. Because of Jon, a dragon got killed last week. A fucking dragon. Honourable he may be, but he's a dumbass. I also really wish they'd mentioned Robb. Correct me if I'm wrong, but Jon hasn't mentioned Robb once since season 4. And in that time, he's mentioned Ned a whole bunch of times. The only Stark who's mentioned Robb at all this season is Sansa. Arya didn't even mention him when she was avenging the Red Wedding and killing all the Freys in episode 1. Jon spent every moment of his childhood with Robb, up until the age of 14 in the books and 17 in the show. They were the same age, they were practically twins, they did absolutely everything together. And now Jon is his successor as king in the North. Robb should definitely be very much on his mind. So as much as I enjoyed it, I thought it was an issue that the conversation between Jon and Theon ended up being about Ned. I know that the show previously had Theon tell Ramsay in season 3, "My real father lost his head in King's Landing," but in reality, Theon was a hostage at Winterfell. As the last living son of Balon Greyjoy, Ned Stark took him as a ward to ensure that Balon Greyjoy behaved himself, and if he hadn't, Ned would have had to execute Theon. So he couldn't have been much of a father figure to him. In the books, it's Robb that Theon grieves for, and that he bitterly regrets betraying. This is what I feel sad about with the show. I want to see the Starks all cuddling and crying about how much they miss Robb and Rickon and Cat, not just Ned. And I want to see Jon considering the mistakes that Robb made when he was king and figuring out how best to avoid them. And I know that everyone has already called this, but Jon telling Theon he doesn't have to choose between being a Greyjoy or a Stark is obviously foreshadowing for the exact same choice that Jon is going to have to make when he discovers who his father was. His loyalties are going to be hugely torn, and maybe it will be Theon that says the exact same line back to him, and maybe then Jon will realise what a fucking stupid thing it is to say to someone having an identity crisis. Saying that, I did really like this scene, especially the fact that Jon goes unintentionally scouse at the end.
So why are you still talking to me?
And so my main takeaway from this was I figured if Jon can forgive Theon, then I can forgive Theon. It's taken 5 years, people, but I'm finally over my Theon hate. This little Fight Club sequence on the beach with Theon v the other Ironborn was pretty dumb, but in a way I did like it. Seeing the old Theon come back after all the torture and abuse was really, really cool. And yes, the fact that he got kneed super hard 4 times in the dick stump saved him in the end was stupid, because of course that would still really fucking hurt. But it doesn't matter. It still made me very happy to see him victorious. He then goes to baptise himself in seawater at the end of the fight, symbolising that Theon Greyjoy has been reborn. Nice. Back to Winterfell, and even though I predicted that Sansa was going to off Littlefinger this season, this scene where she brings Arya before her, seemingly as a prisoner, really had me very, very, very anxious. Seeing 2 of my favourite characters facing off against each other was really horrible because I was terrified that one of them might not make it. Plus, as a rule, when I'm watching Game of Thrones, I'm so engrossed and emotionally involved that all of my theories and predictions go out of my head, and I become a little irrational, emotional ball of anxiety. See my Beyond the Wall reaction video for evidence of this. So when Sansa turned on Littlefinger, I screamed the ruddy bloody house down. I have never felt more relieved about a single thing in Game of Thrones than this moment.
You stand accused of murder. You stand accused of treason. How do you answer these charges? Lord Baelish.
I'm very happy that we got a full rundown of Littlefinger's crimes, especially his involvement in starting the War of the Five Kings. And but still my heart in this scene, Sansa finally fully ascends to being the boss-ass bitch I always knew she was.
When you brought me back to Winterfell, you told me there's no justice in the world, not unless we make it. Thank you for all your many lessons, Lord Baelish. I will never forget them.
Not only that, but all the Starks have learned the lessons of the past and banded together against those who would hurt their family. If Jon had been here, it would have been like all my Christmases come at once. But I guess we'll have to wait till season 8 for that. Now, obviously, a few people have criticised this execution, saying that it isn't the Northern way because the man who passes the sentence must swing the sword. But in the words of Daenerys Targaryen,
"But we are not men."
In their final scene, Arya and Sansa stand on the battlements and act like sisters. They love each other, they respect each other, they admire one another's strengths, and they're prepared to work together to ensure the survival of their house and the North. And they also got their little digs in, because they're sisters.
I believe that's the nicest thing you've ever said to me.
Well, don't get used to it. Still very strange and annoying.
Also this line,
"And the snows fall and the white winds blow. The lone wolf dies, but the pack survives,"
is taken from a conversation that Ned has with Arya in King's Landing in the first book. She's telling him how much she hates Sansa because she sided with Joffrey on the King's Road, which meant that Arya lost her wolf Nymeria and the butcher's boy was killed and Sansa's wolf lady was killed. It did disappoint me that this line wasn't included in the show because it's possibly my favourite line in all of the books. So the fact that they finally got it in, and it was spoken by my favourite Stark, no less, made me very, very happy. It's a really beautiful and satisfying way for rounding off the Stark's plot in season 7. We're a family, we may have our differences, but nothing is ever going to come between us again, and we'll kill anyone who tries. How could anyone not have a lump in their throat while watching that? Doesn't bode super well for Dany in season 8 though, does it? Now alongside Theon, you know who else I stopped hating this episode? Jaime fucking Lannister. Finally, he's reunited with his old buddy, character development, and is off to do something other than standing next to Cersei and glowering. Cersei is still playing the Game of Thrones. Jaime is trying to impress upon her that there is more to life than the Game of Thrones, and that it'll all be for nothing anyway if they don't join the fight against the Night King.
When the fighting in the north is over, someone wins. You understand that, don't you? If the dead win, they march south and kill us all. If the living win, and we've betrayed them, they march south and kill us all.
Jaime's not just being honourable here, he's being utterly rational. And it turns out that Euron has gone off to get the Golden Company from Essos. Very interesting. I actually thought that the political side of the story would die with Littlefinger, and season 8 would then be entirely concerned with the fantasy elements of the story. But clearly, I was wrong. Cersei is still the big bad, and she's still planning on causing problems for the allies in the north. I'm glad about this because I still really want to see Cersei's reunion with Sansa, and to give Sansa Sansa another opportunity to show that the apprentice has now become the master. And once again, Cersei fails to follow through on her threat to kill her brother in this episode. She probably should have, because I don't see Jaime surviving ending well for Cersei at all, considering he's gone off to Winterfell to find the allies and he knows about Cersei's betrayal. But anyway, Jaime's going north! Jaime's going north! This is not a drill! And this means that both halves of Ice, the Stark family greatsword that was taken from Ned and reforged by Tywin Lannister into Widow's Wail, which was for Joffrey, and Oathkeeper, which Jaime then gave to Brienne, both halves of that sword will now be in Winterfell, back where they belong. I would imagine when Jaime arrives in Winterfell, he'll get a pretty frosty, pardon the pun, reception from the Starks. But when he pledges Widow's Wail, and hopefully renames it, to Lord Jon or maybe Queen Sansa, and says, "This sword was forged from your father's sword. I now pledge it back to you to defend the North and House Stark." Maybe things will get better. Me getting over my Jaime and Theon hate now means that there is not a single character left alive that I will be happy to see die. Which means that next season, I think, is going to be incredibly painful. The snow falling over King's Landing was beautiful. The different shots of it falling on the dragon bones in the dragon pit, on the Red Keep, and on Cersei's map were really, really gorgeous. Finally, winter has truly come to Westeros. Does this happen because the White Walkers are so close, or is it a coincidence? I don't know. Back in Winterfell, Samwell Tarly arrives and has a little chat with Bran. And it looks like Sam has abandoned his Night's Watch vows as well by coming to Winterfell instead of going back to Castle Black. So Sam comes in and has a brief catch-up with Bran, and they give us a bit of exposition. Maybe they chose to spoon-feed us this information about who Jon really is, because after the big reveal at the end of season 6, a lot of people didn't catch on, and HBO had to release an infographic telling us exactly what it meant. And I had the same thought as all book readers when Jon's real name was revealed to be Aegon Targaryen, which was... huh? Rhaegar already had a son called Aegon by Elia Martell, but by the time of Jon's birth, Aegon was already dead at the hands of the Mountain. Rhaegar's second son being named Aegon does kind of fit into the idea that he annulled his marriage to Elia, because this would have disinherited his older 2 children. Maybe Rhaegar wanted to start his family again with Lyanna and make 3 new baby dragonlings. And what a dick, right? I know. I can't believe that this enormously obvious mistake would be allowed. I can't believe that something as important as Jon Snow's real name would be changed from George R.R. Martin's original plan. And I think it will make sense at a later date. Maybe it's because Lyanna was all about prophecy too. But she knew at the time of her son's birth that Rhaegar, Rhaenys and Aegon were already dead. And she desperately wanted to ensure that it hadn't all been for nothing, and hoped she could kickstart the fulfillment of the prophecy again by naming her son Aegon as well. So all was not completely lost. This is another instance of is this bad writing or genius, which has been a major theme this season. And obviously Jon and Dany's sex scene, we have to talk about this, but my main thought about it was, it's hilarious that possibly the most long-awaited sex scene in the history of TV was ruined by someone narrating over the top about how they're related. No, classic Thrones. So, the million-dollar question. Why was Tyrion lurking outside the room while they were getting down to it? What is it about this coupling that concerns him so much? I don't think it's about jealousy, that would be very, very boring. I think it might be a political concern that he has. Perhaps it's just the fact that up until this point, he's had Dany's ear, and her having a relationship might mean that Jon now has more influence over her than he does. Or maybe he thinks the political ramifications will be really, really terrible. And the final scene, the thing I've been predicting since the end of season 6, is that the wall has come down. I mean, I expected it all to come down, but actually it just got breached. But still, I was right. Ha! In that shot where the Night's Watch and the wildlings are all running down the steps to try and escape, I don't feel like they were running fast enough. I know it would have been slippery, but I would have been sprinting faster than Usain Bolt down there. Please, gods, tell me that Tormund and Beric got out of there alive. I mean, I don't know how they could have done, but I really, really need them to be all right. They were definitely on the wrong end of the wall, and it definitely all collapsed into the sea, so I don't see how they could have survived, but I know that they are 2 important characters for their deaths to occur off screen, so fingers crossed we'll be seeing them next season. And that's it, guys. The army of the dead and the White Walkers are in Westeros. Holy frickin' balls. Anyway, speaking of deaths, a lot of very bloodthirsty people have complained that there haven't been enough major character deaths in this season. But I have my theory as to why that might be. The original plan for Game of Thrones was that it was going to be spread over 70 hours. I think when they realised that they couldn't satisfactorily wrap up all of the plot lines in 70 episodes, they decided they would split the remaining season into two, which is why we get 2 short seasons at the end, 7 episodes for season 7 and 6 episodes for season 8. This means a lot of the drama is being saved for the final season. Season 7 has mostly been about Daenerys' arrival in Westeros and the impact that that has on the natives. It's also been about trying to bring all those characters together against their common enemy and winding up the political side of the story in favour of the fantasy element, which will dominate season 8. I think so many anticlimactic cliffhangers were used in this season, along with so many Deus Ex Machina moments, which seemed a little bit clumsy, let's be fair, is because that's what the medium of television demands to ensure that people keep watching. Those bits don't serve the overall plot, which requires those people to survive in order to die heroically right at the end of the story. They do, however, serve the format. We could have stuck to the set-piece battles of Dany v the Lannisters for the big action payoffs of the season and left the White Hunt on the drawing board, but the format needs what it needs, so silly plot lines were written in to placate it. After this final episode, which did hint at some further political intrigue still to come, I have high hopes for season 8. I really doubt there will be any filler whatsoever. And those of you who want major characters to die, I think you might end up regretting that because your soul will be hurting a lot after season 8. I honestly don't see anyone surviving apart from Sansa, maybe Davos, Tyrion, Brienne. I can't see anybody else surviving. I think everybody else is for it and we're all gonna really fucking suffer. For my final point of order this week, I'd like to say a giant fuck you to anyone who said that Sansa was a power-hungry bitch whose main arc this season was going to be about her trying to betray and usurp Jon. Sansa has been nothing but loyal and true and faithful all the way through the season, even in the face of some very frustrating and questionable decisions by her brother. She's made it very, very clear that she's a better ruler. People need to start showing her some fucking respect and get comfortable with the idea that Sansa is on the rise and is going to end the series as a very, very important person indeed. And yes, I know, it's not real, but seriously, fuck you, Sansa haters. Fuck you. Okay, now, I just want to go back to Jon and Dany and analyse this a little bit. I know I'm not the only one who thinks that the Jon-Dany romance seems a little bit forced. I have a few thoughts on what might be going on here. A lot of people are saying that all the emotion seems to be coming from Daenerys and not Jon, which is backed up by a few things. Number one, that moment when the squad are pushing the boat off the beach in Dragonstone, and Sajura, a man who we know is hopelessly in love with Daenerys, turns for one last look at her. The camera then subtly pans across to Jon, who shows no such reaction whatsoever. Is this an accident? I don't think so. I think it might be a clue. 2. This line in episode 1.
What did Father used to say? Everything before the word but is horse shit.
And then this line in episode 6.
I'd bend the knee, but...
Once again, is this shit writing or genius? Number 3. The director of the episode The Wolf and the Dragon, Jeremy Podesva, has said this: with Jon and Dany's scene, the important thing for me was that it wouldn't be prurient in any way, and that there's a very strong undercurrent to that scene. It was shot very, very simply. It's basically just one steady push-in shot to Jon and Dany, and then that very important look between them at mid-level. Then a one-shot looking at Jon, then looking down at Dany. It wasn't about shooting a big love-making scene. Once they're making love, that's the story. There's no reason to kind of linger on that. The look on Jon's face before he knocks on Dany's door, and then later on, the look that passes between him and Dany mid-sexy time, have been the subject of much discussion. Maybe at this point, Jon's face is just set in this eternal, grumpy kind of expression, but he really doesn't look to me like a man hopelessly in love. He does, however, look quite conflicted. And while there could be many innocent reasons for this, a possibility, certainly, is that he just isn't very proud of himself in that moment. Let's not forget the only time that Jon has had a sexual relationship with anyone in the past was with Ygritte, when he was undercover in the Wildling army. Corrin Halfhand has ordered Jon to do whatever it takes in order to win the Wildlings' trust and infiltrate their army and learn as much about their plans as possible. In the books, Mance Rayder threatens to execute Jon when he rightly suspects that he might still be loyal to the Night's Watch. Ygritte is the one that comes to his rescue and saves his life by telling Mance Rayder that she and Jon are a couple, and Mance Rayder jokes, well, who am I to separate two hearts that beat as one? Afterwards, Jon tells her that she didn't have to lie for him, and Ygritte says, I didn't lie, I just got the timing a little bit wrong. Because of this, Jon ends up sleeping with Ygritte for the first time. He is essentially forced into this situation in order to follow the orders he was given by Corrin Halfhand, and also to stop Mance Rayder from executing him. That's not to say that he doesn't fall in love with Ygritte in the end, because I think he does. But the relationship's beginning in the books isn't as romantic as in the show, and Jon utterly hates himself for it because he feels completely dishonourable and conflicted between his feelings for her and his Night's Watch vows. I say this to point out that while Jon is a good man, he is nothing if not dutiful, and as he has constantly reiterated throughout this season, he feels his duty is to the north. I feel like if Jon is merely acting on his sexual attraction to Daenerys, we really haven't had enough of a build-up to establish that he fancies her. In fact, we've kind of had the opposite. While Daenerys has shared a lot of personal information about her life with Jon, Jon has played his cards very close to his chest and has shared nothing with Daenerys. She doesn't know a damn thing about him. I barely recall him even smiling at her once. And while we're told by Tyrion and Davos that he stares at her longingly, we haven't seen that happen at all. It seems like that would have been helpful to establish that in the build-up to them consummating their relationship. Point number 4. The books have some hints about what Jon will end up meaning to Daenerys. In A Clash of Kings, when Dany visits the House of the Undying, Dany sees a number of visions, but they are different to the ones we see in the show. One of these visions clearly pertains to Jon, a blue flower growing through a chink in a wall of ice, filling the air with sweetness. This suggests that Jon is going to be important to Daenerys, either as a family member or as a lover, or possibly as both. And number 5, also in the House of the Undying, Daenerys is given a prophecy. Here's where it gets really interesting. Daenerys is told, 3 fires must you light. 1 for life, and 1 for death, and 1 to love. 3 mounts must you ride, 1 to bed, and 1 to dread, and 1 to love. 3 treasons will you know, once for blood, and once for gold, and once for love. I've wondered for a while if all of the love bits at the end of these verses might refer to the same person, and I think that that same person might be Jon Snow. I'm going to assume that the fire for life that Daenerys had to light was the one which birthed her dragons. The fire for death might be when she burned all the cows in Vaes Dothrak and inspired all the Dothraki to then start following her. This hasn't happened in the books yet, but maybe it will happen pretty similarly to how it did in the show. And the fire for love? Maybe in the show that hasn't happened yet, or maybe it's the fires that Daenerys lit in order to save Jon and the rest of his companions from the army of the dead in the last episode. The 3 mounts that Daenerys must ride might refer to animals that she rides. So the mount to bed might be the silver horse that she rides on the way to her wedding night with Khal Drogo. The mount to dread seems pretty obviously to be Drogon, and the mount to love, I mean, it could mean the ship on which she has sex with Jon for the first time. And the 3 treasons, this is my favourite bit. The treason for blood, that's Miriam Azdur when she killed Dany's baby and Khal Drogo. The one for gold, a lot of people think it's Jorah Mormont, but he didn't betray her for gold, he betrayed her for a pardon so he could go home. Maybe we just haven't had it yet. The treason for love, I feel quite strongly will be Jon. I feel that when Jon is forced to choose between Dany and his family, I think he will choose the Starks. I think that he will betray Daenerys because of his love for the North, for Winterfell, and for Sansa, Arya, and Bran. However, with regards to the prophecies, it's possible that they left all this very interesting and juicy stuff out of the show because they weren't intending to use it as plot points. I guess we'll see in the final season. All these things seem to suggest that Jon is playing Daenerys in order to secure the support of her armies and her dragons in the War for the Dawn. I really hope this is the case. This is so much more interesting than all of the good guys banding together in order to fight the otherworldly evil in the north, which is currently the way that the show is heading. I've read a number of arguments online about how Jon is really playing Daenerys to ensure her commitment to his cause, and by being a partner for her, he gives her something that she doesn't have at the moment, which is personal investment in his cause. For those of us who believe that Jon and Dany's courtship seemed rushed and seemed to lack quite a lot of evidence on Jon's side, it would explain a number of things which otherwise could just be bad writing. However, a lot of the arguments that I've read have come from Jonsa shippers on Tumblr. To the uninitiated, that's people who want Jon and Sansa to end up together. So I take it all with a pinch of salt. These people are very committed to the idea that Jon will fall into Sansa's arms at some point before the end of the story, and are determined to twist every little thing in the narrative in order to support this idea. There is literally a war going on Tumblr between those who want Jon Snow to fall in love with his aunt and those who want him to fall in love with his cousin. What a time to be alive. I think when Dany finds out who Jon is, her reaction will be anger. She'll assume he's been lying to her and she'll banish him from her sight. Maybe by then he will have already bonded with Rhaegal, and then that's when we'll get a new Dance of Dragons. Jon versus Dany versus the Night King, all on Dragonback trying to kill each other. Okay, and with that, that's it. We're all done for season 7. A final thought. I ruined this season for myself with spoilers. The off-season was so long that I just had to sate my addiction with something. So I turned to spoilers, and annoyingly learned a great deal of the plot, although I did always manage to come to my senses while reading them and stop myself before I got to the very end. I'd have a moment of clarity when I'd ask myself, do I really want to do this? And stop. I vowed to myself that the final season is far too important to let myself make this mistake again. Anyone looking at spoilers, you have to ask yourself, would you really rather read on a computer screen all the awesome twists and surprises that this show has to offer? Or would you rather wait and be patient and see them acted beautifully with incredible groundbreaking CGI and a gorgeous musical score accompanying it? Just like it was originally intended. So until season 8 comes out, I'm on a strictly spoiler-free diet. Anyone who tells me anything at all gets a poke right in the eye. Capiche? Thanks so much for watching once again. Please subscribe to my channel. I've got more Game of Thrones, A Song of Ice and Fire stuff that I've got in the pipeline, so this isn't the end. I'll also be making videos about a whole bunch of other stuff, so don't go away from my channel. Please like, subscribe, leave a comment, all that jazz, and above all, have a really, really good life until I next see you. Until next time, guys, I wish you good fortune in the wars to come.